Yes, if you are wealthy, look, your income per capita is $1,600. That of South Africa is $8,000. That of the United States is $49,000. How can you say that you're a rich country? Singapore has an income per capita of $38,000. You have $1,600. So I think there's a misnomer. There's a, illusion, a wealth illusion here.
But, I mean, it's interesting to know that every year we have a growth in our GDP.
Yeah.
But does this amount to anything?
No.
Practically.
Listen, if a 5-year-old boy can grow 4 inches in 1 year, while an 18-year-old child eating the same amount of food will grow by 1 inch, I don't think there's anything to scream about if your income, if your GDP is $291 billion and you grow by 6%. Nigeria's potential GDP growth rate is 20%. The difference between its potential GDP growth and its actual growth is something like 14%, which means that the economy is suboptimal. It's growing suboptimally. Secondly, it's a natural wealth economy. Productivity of the labor productivity in Nigeria is 4% growth, actually 3.5% growth, while the GDP is growing at 7%. That means that even without the labor, the GDP was growing on its own. So if you are a natural wealth economy, which means that you just take the oil from the ground and sell it, whilst other countries are produced wealth economies. That is why you have this situation. One of the data points you missed was that Nigeria has a misery index of 32%. Misery index is defined as unemployment plus inflation. In the US, the misery index is 9.6%.
Well,
apart from that, there's what you call the ignorance per capita, which is the reciprocal of the most educated and the well-being of people. The highest education in the world is in Denmark, followed by South Korea. I think the United States somewhere around number 8 or so. In Nigeria, you have one of the high ignorance per capita. In other words, what they call the Mumu factor. Okay, that is high. So you have a high misery index, you have high ignorance per capita, you have low income per capita, and you have a very high cost of governance. All of these things put together, you need to ask yourself, what do you have to do next? You see, the economy, and what is good is that Nigeria is privatizing. Nigeria is selling off state-owned enterprises. We've just done the power thing. So obviously all those employees who are in the government sector will now move out. But you are talking about legislators alone. The executive arm of government. The executive arm of government. This total number
I was coming there, but there's something I would like you to, before, just hold the thought. There is something I want you to mention. When I hear that Nigeria, we grow, our GDP, we grow. So it's a bit deceitful when we hear that we have a GDP growth. Is it deceitful?
No, it's not deceitful. The point is that, look, 100%.
It doesn't practically
100% of 1 is what? 1.
1.
Okay. 10% of 10 is what? 1. 1. Okay. Therefore, if the man who is at 10 grows by 10%, is grown by 1. The man at 1, if he grows by 100%, he has grown by 1. 100% of what? Growth of what? So basically, you're playing with mirrors here. The reality is that what is the total output in the economy? Total output is $291 billion.
So our growth does not even amount to practical relevance and impact on the man on the street.
Well, no, it does. But what is more important is consumption per capita. The consumption per capita.
For some of our viewers who are not as financial or as numerically savvy as yourself, it will interest some of us who perhaps didn't pass mathematics or anything in school to know how practically in 5 years, some of this growth we've had over the last 5 years. What would you say, 5 years in Nigeria?
Yes.
Do we have any progress practically?
No, you have. But two factors. One, you've grown at an average of 7% every year for the past 5 years. That's 35% cumulatively, right? But 35% of that income has gone to only 5% of the population. So one thing is to grow. The other one is to see how income inequality or kind of parity is taking place. So that's one. Two is that the growth is as a result of natural wealth, not because of any production.
So it's almost automatic for Nigeria's growth to move forward.
Yeah, because you drill the oil out of the ground. The people that produce the oil are not less than 0.5% of the population.
So, it's not really the glory of people in government that makes the economy grow.
No. Listen, you have a workforce of 53 million people, and you have only 5 million registered savings accounts under the under the pension scheme. So that tells you the peak. The reality is that, in any case, the reality is that the economy is suboptimal. It's growing. Efforts are being made. These things are not going to be solved. There's no silver bullet going to be solved in one day. Efforts are being made. And it's not government. It is the entire economy. The private sector, the government, everybody. So the total output of the population in financial terms comes to $291 billion. That's what we are saying. The government doesn't produce all of the GDP. The government sets the policies, creates an environment for people to operate. So to think that the GDP is low because of government is a misunderstanding. The reality is that the Nigerian productivity is pretty low. What the government should be doing is creating an environment where the technological breakthroughs and the people can become more productive and efficient.
Okay, you were about to talk about, we looked into the issue of what the legislatures, and you made a comparison between Nigeria and the United States, which to me, some of us will feel that that's a tall order to make a comparison between Nigeria and the US. But essentially, listen, the executive...
So when you go to the Olympics, when you went to Moscow, did they have a special track for the Americans? You have to compete. The global competitiveness index does not care where you come from. The Nigerian who lives here and goes to Yale or goes to Princeton is going to compete. They are not going to give him a special cutoff mark because he's a Nigerian. So the earlier we stop fooling ourselves that we cannot compete against them, there's nothing. Americans don't have two heads.
From what you have analyzed,
yes,
do you think that Nigerian public office holders earn too much?
I don't know. I think they work too little, and not that they earn too much. Right? The output. You see, a day's work for a day's pay. I've just told you that this is what it is. And then you go to how many bills have they passed compared to how many bills have been passed in the United States or in any of these countries for that matter. The country is overgoverned. There are too many people working on governance of 928,000 square kilometers. The size of the country, the physical space of this country is that of Texas.
But
and you have 181.
Isn't it interesting? Yeah. Because this is the provision of the Constitution of Nigeria.
Well, that's fine. I mean, constitutions can be amended. You have 2,500 legislators in Nigeria in the 36 states. I've not added the ward men and all of that. Governing what? Governing a space that is smaller than the state of Texas? Look, Western Nigeria under Awolowo ran all the way from Fadeyi all the way down to Warri or wherever, right? How many commissioners did Western Nigeria have? In that same space now, you have about 7 or 8 governments with commissioners, special assistants, ward men and all of that. What are they governing?
Okay, just hold that thought. When Dr. Obi Ezekwesili actually gave that lecture earlier in the week, well, a lot of people went to town and said, look, what she said is this and that. A lot of people criticized Dr. Obi Ezekwesili. She made some submissions as to how she feels that things should be running in government or in Nigeria. Again, she's been in government before. She was once a Minister of Education. At this time, my guest here is telling me that we are probably overgoverned. That means we have too much people in government. Well, let's take a listen to just a bit of what Dr. Ezekwesili said earlier in the week that actually caught like wildfire. Take a listen.
Paradox is one that should worry every one of us. It is that we have the kind of endowment wealth that breeds poverty, breeds penury. I keep thinking that it might actually improve if you had part-time legislation. And the reason that I also look at it that way is that it would almost be a filter for the quality of people who would go into the National Assembly.
Okay, that was part of what she said. Well, she's already